Chapter 15. A burying beetle on Winchester's boot, Nancy whispered. Barb had said that almost all the beetles on the island were found at the Lewis Dickens farm. Nancy knew that the person who dug the grave on the nature preserve had destroyed one of the nests. This beetle must be one of the adults that disappeared. She had to talk to Jim. Nancy ran down to the trailer and snatched up the phone. Jim was still out. Please tell him to meet me at the Winchester yacht as soon as he can get there. It's urgent. The dispatcher promised to contact him. Nancy ran to her moped and took off. When she arrived at the dock, she saw that the Emily Sue was gone from its mooring. "Oh no," she said out loud. Nancy scanned the harbor but didn't see it. Finally, at the very end of a long pier, some distance away, she spotted the Emily Sue. She jogged along the shoreline to the longer dock and ran out to the end. The yacht was tied up by the gas pump, taking on fuel. Through the large square portholes, she spotted Walt Winchester inside. Where was Jim? Nancy wondered, checking back at the road. She thought about waiting for him, but was afraid Winchester might sail off in the yacht before he arrived. Ashley, Hannah, and her cousin were just getting out of a sailboat tied up at the dock. "Ashley, just the person I want to see," Nancy said. "Would you do me a big favor? I'm expecting Sergeant Hathaway to arrive any minute. Could you wait by the parking lot and tell him where to find me? I'll be aboard the Emily Sue." "Sure, Nancy," said Ashley. "What's going on?" "I'll tell you later," Nancy said. "It's very important." Ashley nodded in comprehension, and she and her cousin took off down the pier. The tide was going out, and the yacht's deck was a few feet lower than the dock. Nancy walked over to the ladder and called down, "Congressman Winchester, may I have permission to board?" He emerged from below.
"Why, Miss Drew, what a surprise! Please come aboard."
As she climbed onto the Emily Sue's deck, he took her hand in a gentlemanly way.
"Beautiful day, isn't it?" Winchester asked, leading her into the cockpit. "I thought I'd take advantage of this breeze and go for a sail."
Now that she was in the harbor, Nancy realized that the wind was much stronger than it appeared on land. She'd become accustomed to Block Island's constant sea breeze, but she guessed that the wind was blowing close to 20 knots. "It does look like a good day for sailing," Nancy agreed. "I imagine the Emily Sue must be pretty fast under these conditions."
"Oh, yes," Winchester said. "She can really kick up a wake. May I offer you something to drink?"
"Thanks, but I can't stay long." She studied him for a moment. He looked strong enough to get the better of a guy like Tom Haines in a fight.
"What's the matter, Miss Drew? Why are you looking at me that way?" Winchester said.
"I need to ask you something," Nancy said.
"Then come into the cabin, where we can be more comfortable."
He turned and led the way down. Nancy glanced up at the dock before she followed him. Still no sign of Jim. She'd have to proceed on her own.
"Have a seat," Winchester said. "Are you sure you don't want a soda?"
She shook her head. "No, thanks. Congressman, you told me that you and your son were both on this boat last Friday night, but Scott told me you weren't here that evening."
"He said that?" Winchester sounded startled. "Well, he's wrong."
"Scott also said that he found a blackmail note, signed T, among the papers in your cabin."
"Why, that sneaky little—"
He stopped himself, but his forehead began to glisten with perspiration.
"He doesn't know what he's talking about. Scott's always been imaginative, constantly making up stories. His teachers complained about it."
"On Monday," Nancy continued, "Hannah and I saw you at the captain's catch. A man talked with you for a short time and left a briefcase for you."
"What's wrong with that?"
Winchester pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead.
"I told you it contained important papers."
"Then you won't mind if the police examine it?"
"Of course not."
He shrugged.
"Unfortunately, it's no longer here." I took it back to New York.
Nancy folded her arms. I have reason to believe the briefcase is still on this yacht and that it doesn't contain papers, but money.
How would you know that?
I also found a pair of your boots, Nancy went on, that prove you were at the nature preserve, walking, or digging, in mud. Winchester stood up, looming over Nancy.
Just exactly what are you trying to...
Nancy, a voice called. Nancy, are you here? That nice girl said you were here. It was Hannah.
Get rid of her, Winchester growled.
Fast. He yanked open a drawer and grabbed a gun. Nancy stood slowly and crossed over to the companionway, keeping an eye on the weapon. She eased up the steps, one at a time.
That's far enough, Winchester ordered.
Nancy's head barely cleared the hatch. Hannah, I'm here, but I can't talk now. Hannah peered down from the deck. Why not? Is Scott with you? I've been looking all over. I couldn't wait to tell you the news. The police found the man who ran you off the road. Hannah, Nancy said with meaning. Scott Winchester is not with me.
Oh, Hannah straightened up slowly.
I see. Well, I'll run along then. Nancy knew Hannah understood her and would call the police. Unfortunately, the same thing occurred to Winchester.
Miss Gruen,
he called, crossing to the bottom of the steps. Nancy felt the gun dig into her side.
Please come down.
It was an order, not an invitation. Hannah glanced toward the dock. Suddenly she began to wave at someone. Hi, Harry. Millie, how have you been? She took a step away.
Nice try, Miss Gruen, but it won't work.
His voice was steely. I don't know what you mean, Hannah stammered. Those are friends of mine.
You're bluffing, he said coldly. I have a gun on Miss Drew, and I won't hesitate to use it. Please come down, right now.
Nancy saw Hannah's sturdy shoes appear on the steps. If Hannah hadn't come, she'd have tried a judo move on the congressman. Now she couldn't be sure of disabling him without putting Hannah in danger. He'd already killed once. The hit-and-run driver was sure to testify to that, and had tried to kill again. Nancy knew he'd shoot if he had to. His cover was blown, and he had nothing to lose.
Miss Drew, please take a seat on the banquet, Winchester ordered.
Keeping her eye on the gun, she moved over to the dining table and sat on the bench.
Slide over,
he ordered. Slowly, Nancy inched along the booth until she was in the center, where the table was between her and the room.
That's far enough,
he said just as Hannah reached the cabin. Hannah glanced at Nancy and seemed relieved to find her unhurt.
Sit down, Miss Gruen, in the swivel chair where I can see you, he said.
Silently and with dignity, Hannah did as he said.